Throughout history, there has been one creature that has brought so much fear in the hearts of mankind that folktales and legends were born out of its image. Given a face in the 1922 horror film Nosferatu, the bat was seen to transfer into the creature of the night, lurking in the shadows waiting for its prey. In American cinema, the 1897 Bram Stoker novel Dracula was brought to the silver screen by actor Bela Lugosi, forever marking the bat as a thing of horror to be feared. But once the spotlight was turned toward the bat, we learned that the bat was not to be feared, but to be admired and praised for what it does for mankind.
Bats are a really important part of nature as far as insect control. So they eat a lot of beetles, moths, insects that fly at night. Sometimes they'll eat insects, although most of their diet is beetles and moths.
Even though they're very tiny, they can eat so many insects. So a big brown bat can eat maybe 2,000 insects in one night for dinner. Of course, it depends on the size of the insect. They eat their entire body weight in food in one night for dinner. So it depends on the size of the insect, but they're very important in controlling insect populations. Then there are the bats that drink nectar. We don't have any of those here in Michigan. They're found out west in the United States. And when they're drinking nectar from inside of a flower, they're helping to pollinate. Just like a hummingbird or a butterfly, they get the pollen on their head, they fly from one flower to the next, and they help pollinate plants.
But just how long have bats been with us, and where did they first come from?
Bats here in the United States date back to about 55 million years ago. The oldest fossil was found in Wyoming of what we call a microbat. Microbats are typically smaller than megabats. So bats come in either one of two groups. Microbats are usually the smaller bats, like micro, meaning small, and megabats are typically larger bats, mega meaning large. But there are some other differences between the two types of bats as well. Here in the United States, we only have microbats.
I would say our most common bats here in our area are the little brown bat and the big brown bat.
Dating back to the Cenozoic period, a time just following the demise of the dinosaurs, one has to wonder if the bat has any characteristics of its reptile ancestors, such as flight or a sense of hearing.
So a bat is a mammal, just like you and I, except what makes them special is that they're the only mammal that can fly. They belong to their own order called Chiroptera, which in Greek means hand-wing, and that's because they fly with their hands. They fly with their hands, so they have the same 5 fingers that you and I do, except they use their fingers to fly. And most of their fingers are so long that if our fingers were as long as a bat's, they would drag on the ground when we walk. And that helps give them extra skin, extra surface area around their hands so they can fly. Think of it kind of like a webbed foot, except it's between their fingers, and their fingers are very, very long, so they can extend out that skin for more surface area to catch the air as they're flying. Most megabats do not use the adaptation that we know of as echolocation. So most megabats use eyesight and their sense of smell and hearing, but especially eyesight. Some megabats have better eyesight than you and I do. Microbats are the species that tend to use echolocation, which is that sound that they emit at such a high frequency that we can't hear it. That sound bounces off of things, objects around them, bounces back to their ears at such accuracy that they can detect even the single strand of hair in front of them. So it creates an image in their head. So microbats are typically the types of bats that you're going to see using echolocation, and megabats do not. People might think that they are blind because the microbats that we see around here, they have really small eyes, and unless you get up really close to them, it's hard to see their eyes. And also too, when they're feeding, sometimes these bats will swoop down towards your head and then swoop away. And people think that they're not seeing where they're going or they're going to get stuck in their hair, but it's simply because you are attracting their food. People attract the bugs that they like to eat, so that's why they swoop closer to you. So there are over 1,400 species of bats throughout the world. So they make up a large portion of the mammals that we have on this planet. And they are not rodents, like people often think that they are. Bats are found on every continent except for Antarctica. Some bats prefer drier climates, and some bats prefer more humid and hotter climates. I would say the bats that we find here in Michigan prefer living in trees. And so they probably prefer cooler areas, I would say, when there's more shade.
Bats can roost either behind bark up in trees. They also roost up in the eaves of buildings. Sometimes they get into attics and they'll roost in an attic, and then at nighttime you'll see them fly out from the building.
We have 9 species of bats in Michigan. 6 of them are considered crevice-dwelling bats, and 3 of them are considered tree bats, where they just hang from limbs and trees. Now, during the winter time, some of these bats go into areas like caves where it's cooler but not freezing outside, so maybe where it's in its 40s, and they will hibernate during the winter time. So they bring down their body temperature, they bring down their whole system, their metabolism, everything slows way, way, way down, so they're not using all those resources so they can survive the winter without eating. And then some bats will migrate to where it's warmer to hibernate.
Having a bat colony roost in the woods or even your backyard trees is one thing. But what happens when your home or place of business becomes the bat's new home?
So bats are an extremely prevalent problem, actually. Most people don't really think about it, but we get hundreds of calls a month on bat problems in people's attics. There's a lot of viruses and diseases that bats do carry, and obviously for that reason, you don't want to be actually living with a bat. The diseases that bats carry can be spread through their saliva as well as through their urine and feces. Their feces is called guano. The most prevalent would be rabies as well as histoplasmosis. Histoplasmosis is spread through their guano and urine, and then rabies is spread through their saliva. So if a bat is in the home with you and were to bite you, obviously the saliva could then get into your bloodstream and then you could get rabies.
It's a very small percentage of bats that carry rabies. I think the percentage here in Michigan, the last that I heard, was around 4% of bats that they tested carried rabies, which is a very small percentage. And usually the way we come into contact with them is when they're sick and they're on the ground and we try to pick them up and they bite us. Bats are not going to fly at you and attack you. That's just not what they do. So unless you are trying to physically pick up that bat or you come into contact with it, you don't really have to worry too much about rabies. Now, of course, if you get bitten by a bat, the first thing you should do is go get a rabies vaccination just to be on the safe side, because rabies is a deadly disease and there's no reason to take the risk. So guano is not poisonous. However, in large quantities, there is a fungus that can grow on the bat guano, on their excrement. When there's large amounts of guano collected in a space, and if it's humid, that fungus, if you get it in your face or you're in that space with it, it can cause issues with your lungs.
Bats in attics has been an issue for essentially as long as people have been building homes. Bats need somewhere obviously comfortable to sleep, and if they don't have trees, especially with all the subdivisions being built up, they do tend to seek out homes. The attics of homes actually create the perfect conditions for a bat. It's safe, it's quiet, it's dark, and it's the perfect temperature for them to kind of roost.
It has happened from time to time when people have a large quantity of bats roosting in their attic, for example, and there's a lot of guano accumulating over a really long period of time that people don't know about. But if you have a bat house outside of your house, for example, and it's about, colony of 100 to 200 bats, most of that guano is going to drop to the ground, and the excrement there is so tiny that it's going to go back into the earth. It's going to decompose. It's going to break apart pretty quickly. So a great thing to do is to put a bat house over your garden, and it provides great fertilizer for your garden, and then you likely will never even see the guano because it'll just go right into the dirt.
So this is a bat house that one of our volunteers has made for us that we sell here at the Nature Center. Bat houses are slender, narrow inside. They have this screening at the bottom that the bats will climb up and roost inside. A lot of people ask, should I paint my bat house? You can either leave it natural or paint it black if you want. That helps attract the heat. It should be placed on the south side of a building or pole, be at least 12 to 20 feet in the air. southeast side, where it's going to attract the most sun, needs to get at least 6 to 8 hours of sunlight, and then 20 to 30 feet away from branches or other structures.
There is a season for bats. Most bats go dormant in the winter, so you won't hear much activity. They don't fully hibernate. It's actually a state of turmoil. So it's almost like hibernation, but they're not fully in hibernation. So during that period, we don't get a ton of bat calls in the attics because obviously they're not moving around. So that's obviously people aren't aware that they're in there. For us, the biggest bat season would be June, July, and August. The main season that a client would have to be aware of would be the maternal season. So since bats are mammals, if a mother bat goes into an attic and has a baby in there, and we exclude that mother, the baby would be stuck in the attic and would not be able to be fed, and it would end up dying.
So if you find that you have bats in your attic and you have to have a professional come out to remove and put a bat excluder out, there's only certain times that they can put bat excluders, especially when they have babies during the months of June and July. They cannot put an excluder in until the babies are able to go out and fly on their own to be able to get out of the attic so that you don't trap them in the attic.
So bats are protected, but obviously human life is considered to be protected over the bat's life. So if there's a large colony of bats in an attic and you decide to leave them in there, it's like a catch-22 because you might end up killing some bats, but you're obviously protecting the humans as well. So maternity season is a tough one to kind of wiggle around. We can do exclusions year-round. There is no blackout season in Michigan, so you don't have to worry about that. Some states actually have firm blackouts where if there's bats in your attic during maternity season, you cannot exclude them. So this is a bat door. This is what we actually use to remove bats from homes instead of having to go in there and manually remove them by hand. The way this works, this one was actually removed today from a home. As you can see, there's silicone on there right there. This will be slid into the hole. Once the tube is inserted in, we'll seal it up tight so the bats cannot wiggle their way around it. That then forces them down the tube. When they go down the tube, they'll slide down and fall right out through the sleeve. The sleeve will stay closed, so if the bats try to re-enter, they would be flying in and they would hit the sleeve and not be able to re-enter that hole. This is left on for about 2 weeks. And then, like I said, we come back, we'll monitor, make sure there's no more bats in there. If there's no new activity, we'll remove this tube and then seal up the hole properly. Ridge vent is one of the most common entry points for bats. This is what's called ridge guard. So this is placed over the ridge vent, which is on the peak of your home. Ridge vent is just a very bad design. It's really easy to manipulate for the bats. They can slide right underneath it. We have videos of bats flying and swooping right underneath a brand new ridge vent. So this goes over your ridge vent and prevents them from getting in. So this rise right here prevents the bats from going into the hole that's left where the ridge vent is.
While the bat eats their weight in insects nightly, other predators look to the bat as a source for their nutrition.
So bats have a few predators out in nature. Great horned owls prey on bats. Another bat predator is the raccoon. Sometimes raccoons get at bats, whether or not they're tucked behind trees or they end up on the ground injured.
With mankind removing the bat from homes and buildings, as well as destroying their natural habitat through development, the bat is now facing a new biological predator that may be the hardest one to overcome yet.
White nose syndrome, since it hit Michigan, has decimated some of the populations of bats, like the little brown bat, which was once the most common bat, especially in the upper part of Michigan and the Upper Peninsula. And I heard estimates of about 90% of their population disappeared from white nose syndrome. So it depends on the species of bat. The bats that hibernate are the ones that are affected by white nose syndrome, because this is a fungus that grows on them when they are hibernating in the caves and in the mines. And when they're hibernating, this fungus itches away at their skin. It's very uncomfortable, and it wakes them up from hibernation, which causes them to use all of those resources, those fat reserves that they collected before going into hibernation. It causes them to use that up. They wake up, then they go out during the wintertime in search of food to replace those resources that they use. And obviously there's no bugs during the wintertime, so a lot of them don't survive it.
From folklores of terror to supporting our ecosystem, the bat has come a long way in its 55 million years of existence. And while they still may give many the creeps, the bat has many secrets and benefits still to be discovered by those who study them.
It's important to know, again, that they're not what people think they are. They're very important to us. They're generally going to leave us alone. And in my opinion, they're fascinating to watch when they're catching insects. We do bat walks here at the Sage Nature Center during the summertime, and I go out with a bat detector that hooks up to my phone. And when we're watching them fly around catching bugs using their echolocation, we use that bat detector to hear them echolocating. So it brings down their voice low enough that we can hear it. And so it's really fascinating to get to hear them doing that while they're eating. And it's also fascinating to watch them eat because they do all these flips and turns in the air to catch the bugs. And if you can get over your fears and watch them, if you can try to do that, it's fascinating to watch them, and it gives you more of an appreciation for them.
So on a warm summer night when the moon is full, look up and thank the bat for everything that it does.